The developer's hand shot across the bar and grabbed a fistful of Dylan Carter's jacket, yanking him half off the stool. "You don't belong here, sailor. You smell like motor oil and food stamps." The whole room turned. Glasses stopped midair. And Dylan, 32 years old Navy technician, a single father with a sleeping daughter waiting at home, didn't flinch. He set his beer down with a steady hand and said 7 quiet words that made a billionaire in the corner drop her phone. "Your Riverside Tower is going to fall." Here's the twist. Nobody in that bar saw coming. The woman watching from the shadows owned that tower, and by morning this broke Navy dad's entire life would be rewritten forever. Before we go further, do me a favor. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight, so I can see how far this story travels. And if you believe good men still deserve a second chance, hit that subscribe button and stay with me till the very end. Callahan's bar sat on the wrong end of a good street, the kind of place where the neon in the window buzzed one letter short of spelling its own name. Dylan Carter came here on Thursdays. Not because the beer was cheap, though it was, and not because anybody knew him, though the bartender, an old Marine named Sal, always nodded when he walked in. He came because for 2 hours on a Thursday night, nobody needed him to be anything. At home, he was Dad. On base, he was Petty Officer Carter, the man who could bring a dead generator back to life with his hands and a flashlight held in his teeth. On the side evenings and weekends when the Navy pay stretched thin, he was the guy the neighbors called when their transmission dropped or their furnace quit in January. Everybody needed something. That was the shape of his life. Give, 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 and pray there was enough left over at the end of the month for shoes when Lily's feet grew again. So on Thursdays, he sat at the far end of Sal's bar near the wall, and he let himself be nobody for a little while. He was good at it. 8 years in the Navy had taught him to disappear inside himself, to sit still, to watch a room without being watched. "Same as always?" Sal asked. "Same as always." Sal slid a beer down the wood. "You look beat, Carter." "I'm always beat, just got better at hiding it." Dylan wrapped his hand around the cold glass but didn't drink yet. His knuckles were split from the afternoon, a busted knuckle from a wrench that slipped and dried blood he hadn't noticed until now. He'd fixed a widow's water heater after his shift. She'd tried to pay him $40. He'd taken 20 and told her the rest was on the house, and then he'd driven home wondering how a man could feel rich and broke in the exact same minute. "How's the little one?" Sal asked. Something in Dylan's face softened the way stone softens when you're not looking. "Lily lost a tooth. Front one. Now she whistles when she says her S's. Drives her crazy. Makes me laugh so hard I have to leave the room. 8 years old now. 8 going on 40. Kid runs the house. I just pay the bills." Sal chuckled and moved off to serve someone else. And Dylan finally took a drink, and for a moment, just a moment, the noise in his chest went quiet. That was when the developer arrived. He came through the door like he owned the deed to the air. A man in a suit that cost more than Dylan's truck, flanked by 2 younger men who laughed at everything he said before he finished saying it. His name, Dylan would learn later, was Preston Marsh, and Preston Marsh had the particular loudness of a man who had never once in his life been told no by someone who could make it stick. "Scotch," Marsh announced to the room, not to Sal. "The good one. Not whatever swill these people drink." Sal's jaw tightened, but Sal had poured drinks for 40 years and worn a uniform before that, and he knew that some fights weren't worth the glass they'd break. He poured the scotch. Marsh talked. Loud, expansive, the kind of talk that fills a room the way smoke fills a room, uninvited and impossible to ignore. He talked about his projects, his towers, his vision. He talked about the little people who didn't understand ambition. He talked, and the bar got smaller around him, and Dylan sat at his end of the wood and drank his beer and tried the way he tried every day of his life to just be nobody for a little longer. But nobody is a thing you're allowed to be only if the world lets you. It started because Marsh's eye landed on the patch on Dylan's jacket. A Navy insignia faded from 100 washes. "You," Marsh said, pointing his scotch across the room. "Military." Dylan considered not answering. considered the shape of the night, the weight of his own tiredness, the daughter asleep at home with a gap in her smile. He answered anyway, because his mother had raised a man who answered when spoken to. "Navy," Dylan said. "Yes, sir." "Navy." Marsh said the word like it was a joke he was still deciding whether to tell. "What do you do in the Navy swab decks?" One of the young men laughed. "I keep things running," Dylan said evenly. "Engines, electrical, systems that people's lives depend on. A mechanic." Marsh nodded slowly, savoring it, turning it over. "A uniformed mechanic, and they let you drink in bars with real people now. Progress." He raised his glass in a mock toast. "To the working man. May he always know his place." The two young men laughed harder. Now here is the thing about Dylan Carter that the developer could not see, because men like the developer never saw it. Dylan had held a dying sailor's hand in a passageway 3 decks down while the ship pitched in a storm, and the kid asked him if it was going to be okay. And Dylan had lied to him with a steady voice, because that was the kindest thing left to do. Dylan had gone 36 hours without sleep to keep a generator alive, so that 180 men could see and breathe and stay warm. Dylan had buried his wife 2 days after a chaplain knocked on his door, and then he had gotten up the next morning and made his daughter's lunch because there was no one else to do it, and she still needed to eat. A man who has done those things does not react to a fool in a suit. A man who has done those things has learned that the loudest voice in the room is almost always the emptiest. So Dylan didn't stand up. He didn't clench his fists. He turned back to his beer, and that the not reacting, the calm, the refusal to be provoked, was somehow worse for Marsh than any insult could have been. Because men like Marsh don't need to win. They need you to feel that they've won. And Dylan's stillness gave him nothing. Marsh set his scotch down and walked over. His two young men trailed behind. He stopped beside Dylan's stool and leaned in close, and the smell of him was expensive and sour at once. "I'm talking to you, sailor." "I heard you. Then look at me when I talk." Dylan set his beer down. He turned on the stool slowly, and he looked at Preston Marsh with eyes that had watched better men than this one fall apart and put themselves back together. And there was nothing in those eyes that Marsh could use. No fear. No anger. Just a bone-deep, patient tiredness. And underneath it, something harder than the developer's whole net worth. "I'm looking at you," Dylan said. That was when Marsh grabbed his jacket. The hand came fast, a fistful of worn canvas, yanking Dylan half off the stool. "You don't belong here, sailor. You smell like motor oil and food stamps." The whole room turned. Sal's hand went under the bar toward the phone. The two young men grinned like dogs who'd cornered something. And Dylan Carter did not resist. He let himself be pulled forward, let the developer feel his own strength for a second, and then with a calm that was more frightening than any struggle, he reached up, wrapped his split-knuckled hand around Marsh's wrist, and simply held it still. Not twisting, not hurting, just stopping it the way you stop a door from slamming. There was so much quiet control in that grip that Marsh's face changed. For just a flicker, he understood that the man he'd grabbed could have broken his arm in 3 places before anyone finished a breath and had chosen not to. "Let go of me," Dylan said quietly, "before you embarrass yourself further." Marsh let go. He stepped back, straightening his jacket, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. "You people are all the same. All muscle, no brains. You fix things because you'll never build anything. You'll die in that uniform, and nobody will remember your name." And here is where the night turned. Because if Marsh had stopped there, Dylan would have finished his beer and gone home, and none of this would have happened. But Marsh couldn't stop. Men like him never can. He had to plant the flag. "You know what I do," Marsh said, spreading his arms to the room, playing to his audience. "I build the skyline. That riverside tower going up on the water, that's mine. 40 stories of glass and steel that'll be there in 100 years. That's what a real man builds. Not oil changes. Legacy." The bar was quiet now, watching. And Dylan Carter, who had spent his whole life keeping his mouth shut, who had swallowed 1,000 insults for the sake of peace, looked up at this loud, empty man bragging about a building, and something in him decided that tonight he was not going to swallow it. Because Dylan knew that building. He knew it the way he knew everything by accident, by being the man nobody notices in the room. 3 weeks earlier, he'd been called out to fix the diesel backup generators at a construction site on the water. Off the books, cash job a foreman who needed it done overnight before an inspection. And while Dylan had worked in the guts of that building for 11 hours alone, with nothing but his tools and his eyes, and a lifetime of understanding how metal behaves under load, he had seen something. He'd seen the way the support columns on the 7th floor were tied into the transfer beam. He'd seen a weld pattern that made his stomach drop. He'd seen a foundation drainage system routed in a way that would trap water against load-bearing steel in exactly the wrong season. He wasn't a structural engineer, but he was a man who had spent 10,000 hours learning how things fail, because in the Navy, when things fail, people die, and you learn to feel the failure coming before the gauges ever show it. He'd mentioned it to the foreman. The foreman had shrugged. "Above my pay grade, brother. Just weld what they tell me." And Dylan had gone home and lain awake that night thinking about the families who'd someday live in that glass tower, and then his own life had swallowed him whole again. The shifts, the side jobs, Lily's cough, the truck's brakes, and he'd let it go. But now, here was the man who owned it. Bragging. Dylan stood up. Slowly. He was not a big man, but there was a weight to the way he rose that made the two young grinning men stop grinning. "Your Riverside Tower," Dylan said, and his voice was so calm, it cut through the room like a blade is going to fall. The bar went silent. Completely, utterly silent. Even the buzzing neon seemed to hold its breath. Marsh blinked. "What did you say?" "You heard me." Dylan's eyes didn't waver. "The transfer beam on the 7th floor. The way the columns are tied in, it's wrong. There's a load path there that nobody designed for. And your drainage on the east foundation is going to trap groundwater against the primary steel every spring when the river rises. Give it a few years, a few freeze-thaw cycles. That building is going to have a structural risk you are ignoring right now. And when it fails, it won't be your name on the lease of the people inside it." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Marsh laughed, but it was a different laugh now, thinner. "You're insane. You're a mechanic making up words you heard on a documentary. You don't know the first thing about my building." "I was inside it 3 weeks ago," Dylan said. "Fixing your backup generators. Cash job overnight before your inspection. Ask your foreman about the guy from the Navy who wouldn't stop asking why the 7th floor didn't feel right." The color drained from Marsh's face just slightly, just for a second, but Dylan saw it. Because it was true, and Marsh knew it was true, and the fact that it was true was more terrifying than any lie. "You're lying," Marsh said, but the confidence had gone out of it. "I don't lie," Dylan said. "I don't have the time. Now let me finish my beer in peace." He sat back down, picked up his glass. And as far as Dylan Carter was concerned, that was the end of it. Another loud man put back in his box, another Thursday night surviving itself. He had no idea that in the corner of the bar, a woman had just dropped her phone. Vivian Hale did not come to places like Callahan's. Vivian Hale came to boardrooms where men 20 years her senior went pale when she raised an eyebrow. She came to private dining rooms with no menus and no prices. She came to the tops of buildings, not the bottoms of neighborhoods. At 34, she controlled quietly through a lattice of holding companies that made her name almost impossible to trace one of the largest infrastructure empires on Earth. Ports, bridges, power grids. The bones of the modern world ran through companies she owned, and almost no one knew her face. She was here tonight for a reason that would have surprised everyone who thought they knew her. She was here because she couldn't stand to be in her own apartment anymore. 52 floors up, glass on every side, a view of the whole city glittering below her like something she'd already conquered and now had no idea what to do with. Silence so total she could hear the refrigerator hum from 3 rooms away. She had everything a person could buy and nothing a person actually needs, and some nights the emptiness of it got so loud that she had to go down into the city, into the noise, into a bar where nobody knew her, just to remember that other human beings existed. So she'd put on a plain coat, told her driver to wait 3 blocks away, and walked into the first bar with a burnt-out sign. She'd taken the corner, ordered whiskey. And she'd done the thing she always did, the thing that had made her fortune and cost her everything else she watched. She watched people the way she watched markets. Cold, precise, reading the tells, the fear, the greed, the little desperations that drove them. She'd been watching the whole bar for an hour, filing everyone away in the ledger of her mind. The bartender who used to be a soldier, the tired waitress, the loud man in the expensive suit who reminded her of every man she'd ever fired. And she'd been watching the quiet one at the end of the bar too, the Navy man with the split knuckles. She'd noticed him because he was the only person in the room who wasn't performing. He wasn't waiting for anyone to look at him. He drank his beer and stared at nothing and carried himself like a man who had already survived the worst thing that would ever happen to him and now simply endured the rest. She'd found him mildly interesting. A curiosity. Nothing more. Until he said the words Riverside Tower. Vivian's whiskey stopped halfway to her lips. Because the Riverside Tower was not Preston Marsh's building. Not really. Preston Marsh was the developer of Record the Loud Face, the ribbon cutter, the man whose ego needed a skyline. But the capital behind that tower, the money that had actually financed 40 stories of glass and steel on the water, flowed through 4 shell companies and a Cayman trust that not even Marsh fully understood from Vivian Hale. It was her building. Her risk. Her name buried so deep no journalist would ever find it, but her money and her liability all the same. And 3 days ago, an internal structural review one she'd commissioned quietly, because something about the project's cost overruns had made her instincts itch, had landed on her desk, flagged in a color her analysts only used when they were frightened. Amber. Concern. Recommend further investigation. The report had noted among a dozen technical items she'd only half understood 2 specifics. A load transfer anomaly on the 7th floor, and a foundation drainage design that failed to account for seasonal groundwater intrusion on the east side. She had read that report at 2 in the morning alone, 52 floors up. She had flagged it and told herself she'd deal with it Monday. She had told no one. It was confidential to the point of being secret. Maybe 6 human beings on the planet had seen it, all of them under ironclad agreements. And now a Navy mechanic in a $20 jacket in a dying bar on the wrong end of a good street had just named both flaws out loud. To a room full of strangers, without ever having seen the report. Vivian's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered on the table. She barely noticed. She was staring at Dylan Carter, and for the first time in years, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Vivian Hale felt something she had trained herself out of feeling entirely. She felt surprised. Not the pleasant surprise of a good return or the sour surprise of a bad quarter. The deep, disorienting surprise of the world being different than she'd believed it to be 1 second ago. She had built her entire life on the certainty that she saw more than everyone else, that her intelligence, her money, her army of experts gave her a view of reality that ordinary people could never touch. That the little people down here in the bars, and the side jobs, and the food stamp jackets simply did not know things, and a mechanic had just seen with his bare eyes and his bare hands what 6 figures worth of engineering analysis had barely caught. A thing she was paying an army to understand. A thing that could cost her $400 million and someday lives. She looked at him again, and this time she did not see a man in a cheap jacket. She saw a mind. She saw an instrument more precise than any report on her desk. She saw the single most valuable person in the room, and he was drinking a $4 beer and had absolutely no idea what he'd just done. Across the bar, Marsh was recovering his bluster. "You know what, you're not worth my time," he was saying, backing toward his young men. "Enjoy your sad little life, mechanic. Some of us have real work to do." He and his entourage swept toward the door. Dylan didn't watch them go. He'd already forgotten Marsh the way you forget a mosquito after you've swatted at it. He finished the last of his beer and set the glass down and reached for his wallet, counting out ones and a couple of quarters, careful with it the way a man is careful when every dollar is spoken for. "Sal," he said. I'm out. Tell Maria I said hi. You take care, Carter, Sal said. Get some sleep. Someday. Dylan almost smiled. He stood pulling his jacket straight and turned toward the door, and Vivian Hale was standing in front of him. He hadn't heard her cross the room. Nobody had. She'd moved the way she did everything quiet and total, and now she was simply there. A woman he'd half noticed in the corner, close enough that he could see her eyes were the color of steel in cold light, and that they were fixed on him with an intensity that made the back of his neck prickle the way it used to before something on the ship went wrong. I need to talk to you, she said. Dylan took a small step back. Not out of fear, out of the caution of a man who has learned that when strangers want something from you, it usually costs you. I think you've got the wrong guy, ma'am. I don't. Her voice was low-controlled, but there was something underneath it that she couldn't quite keep out, a thread of urgency, almost of fear, that did not match her calm face. The 7th floor, the transfer beam, say it again. Dylan studied her. He was good at reading people. It was the same skill that read machines, the same attention to the small wrong sound under the smooth running one. And what he read in this woman confused him. She was dressed plain, but she didn't move plain. She held herself like someone who had never once waited in a line. And she was looking at him like he was holding a match over something that could burn her whole life down. Why do you care? He asked slowly. Because you're right, she said. And I need to understand how you know. I told you, I was inside it. I saw the welds. Nobody sees a load transfer anomaly from looking at welds. Her jaw was tight. Engineers with 30 years of experience missed it. I want to know how a man fixing generators didn't. Dylan felt something shift in the air between them, some door opening that he wasn't sure he wanted to walk through. Lady, I don't know who you are, but I've got a daughter asleep at home and an alarm at 4:30. I don't have time for whatever this is. He moved to step around her. It's my building, Vivian said. Dylan stopped. She said it quietly. No drama, no performance. Just 3 words dropped like a stone into still water. Marsh is the developer. She went on, her voice never rising. The face, but the money behind that tower is mine. Every column, every beam, every family that will someday sign a lease and move their children in. It's mine. And 3 days ago I read a confidential report that said exactly 2 things were wrong with it. A load transfer anomaly on the 7th floor and a groundwater drainage flaw on the east foundation. 6 people on Earth have read that report. And I just watched a man I've never met name both of them out loud in a bar. The room seemed very quiet around them. Sal at the far end had gone still, sensing without understanding that something enormous was happening in the space between these 2 people. Dylan looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something that Vivian Hale, in all her years of holding power over frightened men, had never once had someone do to her at a moment like this. He didn't get excited. He didn't get scared. He didn't ask what was in it for him. He got concerned. Then you've got a problem, he said simply. Because it's not a maybe. That building will fail. Not tomorrow, but it'll fail. And if you know it and you don't fix it, that's on you. He held her eyes. How far along is it? Is anyone living in it yet? And that question, that single question, the fact that his first instinct on learning the building belonged to a powerful stranger, was not what can I get, but is anyone in danger? Hit Vivian Hale somewhere, she'd forgotten she could be hit. Not yet, she said, and her voice was different now, quieter. 6 months to occupancy. Then you've got time, if you move now. He shifted his weight, and she saw him doing the math, the real math, the kind that had nothing to do with money. You'll need to open up the 7th floor, full inspection of the transfer beam and the column ties. And you need to re-engineer that east foundation drainage before spring, or the freeze-thaw will do damage you can't see until it's too late. You could tell me all this, Vivian said slowly, and walk out that door and I'd never find you again, and you'd never make a dollar from it. Why are you telling me? Dylan Carter looked at this stranger, this plainly dressed woman who apparently owned a piece of the skyline, and he gave her the truest answer he had. Because someday somebody's kid is going to sleep on the 7th floor of that building, he said. And I'd want somebody to tell me. For a moment, Vivian Hale, a woman who could buy the bar the block and every soul in it, had nothing to say. Then she reached into her plain coat and pulled out a card. No logo, no title, just a name and a number printed in small black type. She held it out. "My name is Vivian Hale," she said, watching his face. "I don't expect that to mean anything to you." It didn't. Dylan took the card and looked at it and looked back at her, and there was not a flicker of change in his face, no recognition, no widening of the eyes, no sudden shift in the way he stood. She might as well have handed him a grocery receipt. And she realized with a jolt that she had spent so many years being handled by people who knew exactly who she was and exactly what she was worth that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply be a person standing in front of another person. This man did not know she was one of the wealthiest people alive. And knowing it a second later, because she'd told him plainly, had changed nothing in him at all. That shocked her more than the warning about the tower. "Should it mean something?" Dylan asked. A small, strange thing happened at the corner of Vivian Hale's mouth. It took her a second to recognize it. She was smiling. A real one, small and unpracticed, the first genuine smile she'd worn in longer than she could count. "No," she said. "I don't think it should." Dylan tucked the card into his jacket pocket. "Well, Ms. Hale, do the right thing with your building. That's all I care about." He nodded to her the small, respectful nod of a man raised right and moved past her toward the door. "Wait," she said. He stopped, hand on the door. "You said you were inside it, doing the generators, cash, overnight." She was already thinking 3 moves ahead, the machine of her mind spinning back to life. "Would you be willing to walk an inspector through what you saw, show them exactly what caught your eye?" Dylan turned. And for the first time, a flicker of something wary crossed his face. The caution of a man who has been burned by people with money before, who has been used and underpaid and thanked and forgotten. "I've got a job, Ms. Hale. 2 jobs. I don't have—" "I'll pay you," she said, "for your time. Whatever your rate is, times 10, times 20, it doesn't matter." And Dylan Carter did something else she'd never seen a person in her orbit do. He hesitated, not because the number was too low, but because he wasn't sure he should. "I don't need your charity," he said quietly. "It's not charity." Vivian stepped closer, and now the urgency was fully in her voice, stripped of all the boardroom armor. "Mr. Carter. Dylan Carter. Mr. Carter, do you understand what you did tonight? I employ some of the best structural engineers in the world. I pay them more than you'll make in a decade. And not one of them stood in that building and felt what you felt. You have something I cannot buy, and I have spent my entire life learning that anything I can't buy is the only thing worth having." She held his eyes. "I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a job, because you're better at the one thing I need right now than every expert I own." The bar was silent. Sal was pretending to polish a glass that was already clean. Dylan Carter stood there in his worn jacket with his split knuckles and his 4:30 alarm and his daughter asleep at home with a gap in her smile, and he looked at this woman who had in the space of 10 minutes walked out of a corner and turned his ordinary Thursday into something he didn't have a name for. He thought about Lily, about the shoes she'd need next month, about the medical bill still sitting on the counter, about all the years he'd spent being the man nobody noticed, the man who fixed the world quietly and got thanked with a 20 and a nod. He thought about how tired he was. And he thought about the fact that this stranger, this billionaire in a plain coat, was standing in a dying bar, looking at him like he was the most valuable thing in the room, not because of what he had, but because of what he saw. "I'll walk your inspector through it," Dylan said finally. "On one condition." "Name it." "You actually fix the building. All of it. No shortcuts, no cover-ups, no waiting for a better quarter." His voice was level and hard as steel. "If I find out you knew and you buried it, I'll go to every newspaper in this city. I don't care who you are." Vivian Hale looked at this man who had nothing threatening a woman who had everything, and instead of anger, She felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Respect. "You have my word," she said. And she meant it, which surprised her too. Dylan nodded once. "Then I guess I'll hear from you." He pushed open the door. The cold night air spilled in around him. And just before he stepped out, he glanced back at her. One last look, curious and cautious, and something else he couldn't name. And then he was gone into the dark, back to his real life. The small, hard, beautiful life that never once paused for anything. Vivian Hale stood alone in the middle of Callahan's bar, holding nothing. Her phone still lying forgotten on the corner table, and she realized her heart was beating fast in a way it hadn't in years. She turned to Sal, who was watching her with an old soldier's careful eyes. "That man," she said. "Does he come here often?" "Every Thursday," Sal said. 8 years near enough. Best man I know." He set the glass down. "And in case you're wondering, lady, 'cause I've seen enough of your type to know he's not for sale. Not the parts that matter." Vivian looked at the door Dylan had walked through. "No," she said softly, half to herself. "I don't think he is." She walked back to the corner, picked up her phone, and saw that in the last 10 minutes she'd missed 4 calls from her chief of staff, 2 from her lawyer, and 1 from the very engineering firm whose amber-flagged report had brought her out into the night in the first place. Any other evening, she'd have answered them in the order of their importance. Tonight she put the phone in her pocket without looking at it. She left cash on the table enough to cover her whiskey 10 times over, and she walked out into the cold, and her driver pulled up 3 blocks away, exactly as instructed. And she got into the back of a car worth more than Callahan's entire building, and she sat in the leather quiet and looked out at the city glittering by. Somewhere out there was a tired man driving a truck with bad brakes home to a sleeping daughter. A man who had no idea that he had just changed the course of his own life, without meaning to a man who had chosen for no reward to warn a stranger about a danger she'd been about to ignore. And somewhere up ahead was a building 40 stories of glass and steel, rising over the black water of the river that had a flaw in its heart, a flaw that only one person on Earth had truly seen, and that person fixed generators for cash on the side just to survive. Vivian Hale leaned her head against the cold window, and for the first time in a very long time, she thought about someone other than herself. She thought about tomorrow, because tomorrow everything was going to change for the building, for the mechanic, and though she didn't yet understand how completely for her. She took out her phone and typed a single message to her chief of staff, her thumbs moving fast in the dark. "Cancel my morning. Get me a full independent structural review of Riverside, effective immediately. And find me everything you can on a Navy technician named Dylan Carter." She hit send. Then she looked back out at the city, at all those lights, all those lives, all those buildings full of sleeping people who trusted that someone somewhere was making sure the walls would hold. And for the first time, she could remember Vivian Hale did not feel alone in the quiet. She felt like she'd just met the only honest man in the world, and she had no intention of letting him disappear. The alarm went off at 4:30, and Dylan Carter's hand found it in the dark before his eyes were even open the way it had every morning for years. He lay still for a moment in the gray quiet, listening to the house, the tick of the old radiator, the hum of the refrigerator down the hall, and beneath it all faint and steady, the sound of his daughter breathing in the next room. That sound was the whole reason he got up. It had been the whole reason for 8 years. He swung his legs out of bed and last night came back to him in pieces. The developer's hand on his jacket. The words leaving his mouth before he'd fully decided to say them. And the woman. Vivian Hale. The plain coat, and the steel eyes, and the card in his jacket pocket that he'd almost thrown away when he got home, and then hadn't for reasons he couldn't quite explain. He padded down the hall in his socks and stopped in Lily's doorway. She was a small lump under the blankets, one arm thrown over the stuffed rabbit that had lost most of its stuffing years ago. Her mouth open, whistling faintly through the gap where her tooth used to be. Dylan stood there for a second, and let himself feel the thing he only let himself feel when she was asleep and couldn't see it. The enormous, terrifying love of a man who has already lost one person and knows exactly how fast the ground can open up. "Morning bug," he whispered, too quiet to wake her. Daddy's got early call. Mrs. Alvarez'll get you to school. He made her lunch first, the way he always did. Peanut butter, the crusts cut off because she was 8 and had opinions a note tucked into the bag that said, "You're my favorite person. Have a good day. Love, Dad." He wrote one every day. Someday she'd be too old for it and he'd stop. But that day wasn't today, so he wrote it. Then he showered fast, put on his uniform, and was reaching for his keys when his phone buzzed on the counter. He didn't recognize the number. At 4:50 in the morning, an unknown number was either a wrong dial or a job. He answered on the second ring, keeping his voice low so it wouldn't carry down the hall. "Carter. Mr. Carter." A woman's voice. Crisp, professional, wide awake. Not Vivian. "My name is Billionaire Heiress. I'm the chief of staff for Ms. Vivian Hale. I apologize for the early hour. I was told you'd likely be awake." Dylan leaned against the counter. She wasn't kidding then. Ms. Hale rarely kids Mr. Carter. There was the faintest dry humor in it. "She's asked me to arrange a site visit to the Riverside development this morning. She'd like you present to walk our engineering team through your observations. I understand you have military obligations, so we'll work entirely around your schedule. Whatever hours you can give us, we'll take." Dylan looked at the clock. "I've got Navy call from 6 to 1400. That's 2 in the afternoon. Then we'll expect you at 2:15 if that suits. A car will... I've got my own truck." A small pause. "Of course. I'll text you the site address and the gate code. Mr. Carter." And here her tone shifted just slightly from professional to something more careful. "I've worked for Miss Hale for 9 years. I've never once seen her cancel a full morning of meetings on no notice. Whatever you said to her last night, it landed. I thought you should know that." Dylan didn't know what to do with that, so he said the only thing he could. "I just told her the truth about her building." "Yes," Billionaire Heiress said. "I gather that's rarer than it should be. 2:15, Mr. Carter." And she was gone. He stood there holding the phone. Down the hall, Lily's breathing hitched and resettled. Dylan looked at the note he'd written. "You're my favorite person." And then he put on his cover, picked up his keys, and went to work. And for the whole 8-hour shift, no matter how deep he was in the guts of a diesel engine, some part of his mind was standing on the 7th floor of a glass tower on the water. Vivian Hale had not slept. She'd told herself she would on the ride home. She'd walked into her apartment at midnight, 52 floors up. All that glass, all that silence. And instead of going to bed, she'd gone to her study and pulled the amber-flagged report back up on the screen and read it again. And this time, she hadn't skimmed the technical sections. This time, she'd made herself understand every line cross-referencing terms she didn't know, because a mechanic in a bar had understood them without being told. And she'd be damned if she'd let herself understand her own building less than a stranger did. By 3 in the morning, she'd known 2 things for certain. The first was that Dylan Carter was right. The report and his warning matched so precisely that there was no other explanation. The man had genuinely seen it with his own eyes in 11 hours of overnight work. The second thing she knew was harder to look at directly. It was that if she had never walked into that bar, she would have flagged the report, told herself she'd deal with it Monday, and quite possibly buried it under the 10,000 other fires that a woman with her holdings had to put out every week. She might have let it slide. Not out of malice, out of momentum, out of the sheer grinding weight of having too much. And a building would have opened, and families would have moved in, and someday she'd shut the laptop at 3:15 and stood at the window looking out at the city and felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. Shame. Not the performed shame she sometimes wore in negotiations to make an opponent lower his guard. Real shame. The private kind. The kind that told her something about who she'd let herself become. So she had not slept, and at 9 in the morning, she'd been in the office of Marcus Webb, the founder of the most respected independent structural engineering firm in the country. A man who did not take same-day meetings for anyone, and who had cleared his entire morning the instant her assistant said her name and the word emergency. Vivian. Marcus Webb was 70 years old, silver-haired, with the calm of a man who'd spent 50 years making sure buildings didn't kill people. "You look like hell. What's wrong?" She'd handed him the report, watched him read it, watched the exact moment his face changed the same amber flags, catching the same 2 items rising off the page. "Where did this come from?" he asked quietly. "An internal review I commissioned. Marcus, I need the truth and I need it fast. Is this real?" He was quiet a long moment reading. "This transfer beam detail. If it's as described." He set the report down. "Vivian, I'd have to see it, but if this is accurate, you don't have a problem. You have a catastrophe waiting for a schedule. Who flagged these 2 items?" "Your internal people wrote a cautious report, but whoever pointed them at these specific details, that's someone who knew where to look." This reads like someone confirmed a suspicion they already had. And Vivian Hale, who lied for a living, who could sit across from titans of industry and never show a card, found that she did not want to lie to this old, honest man. "A Navy mechanic," she said. Marcus Webb blinked. "I'm sorry. I met a man in a bar last night. A Navy technician. He fixes engines. He was inside the building 3 weeks ago doing cash work on the generators overnight, and he stood on the 7th floor and felt that something was wrong. He named both of these flaws to my face without ever seeing this report. He doesn't have an engineering degree. He has," she searched for the word, "instinct. 10,000 hours of watching things fail," he called it. Marcus Webb leaned back in his chair, and to her surprise he laughed, not unkindly, but with the deep appreciation of an old craftsman recognizing something rare. "Of course he did. You want to know a secret, Vivian? The best structural sense I ever saw didn't come from a university. It came from an old ironworker on a bridge job in 1974 who told me a cable was going to fail 6 weeks before my instruments agreed with him. He couldn't have explained the math to save his life. He just knew. Some people have hands that hear things." He tapped the report. "If your Navy man saw both of these, I want him on the site walk. He'll cut my inspection time in half." "He'll be there at 2:15, Vivian said. "He has a shift first." "A shift?" Marcus shook his head, still smiling. "God bless him. All right, I'll pull a team. And Vivian..." The smile faded into something graver. "You did the right thing bringing this to me the same day. A lot of people in your position would have sat on it. Reputational risk, the cost of a delay, the lawyers whispering about liability. It takes a certain kind of person to move this fast on something that's going to hurt." Vivian looked at the old man and thought about how close she'd come to being exactly the kind of person he was praising her for not being. "Someone reminded me what it's supposed to be about," she said. Dylan pulled his truck up to the Riverside site gate at 2:14 in the afternoon, still in his uniform, having driven straight from base with a gas station coffee going cold in the cup holder. He punched in the gate code Catherine Reyes had texted, and the barrier rose, and he drove into a construction site that made him feel as construction sites always did, both at home and out of place at home, with the machines and the raw, honest work of building something out of place among the men in ties standing near a cluster of black SUVs, who clearly did not build anything with their hands. He parked his beat-up truck between 2 vehicles that each cost more than he'd make in 3 years, got out, and there she was. Vivian Hale, in a hard hat that looked wrong on her, the way a crown would look wrong on a factory worker, standing next to an older silver-haired man and a knot of engineers, and the moment she saw Dylan's truck, she broke away from all of them and walked toward him. And Dylan noticed that every single person on that site tracked her movement like she was weather. "Mr. Carter?" She stopped in front of him. In daylight, she looked different, less like a mystery from a dark bar and more like exactly what she was, a woman who ran things. But her eyes were the same. "You came." "Said I would." He glanced past her at the crowd of suits. "You didn't tell me you were bringing an army." "That's not an army. That's Marcus Webb and his team. He's the best structural engineer alive, and he cleared his whole day because of what you said last night." She paused. "I told him. About you. How you knew." Dylan's jaw tightened slightly. "Great. So now a bunch of guys with degrees get to watch a mechanic point at things. No. Her voice was sharp, and it surprised him. That's not what this is. Marcus doesn't think you're a joke, Mr. Carter. He said. She almost smiled. He said some people have hands that hear things. He wants your eyes on that building more than he wants anyone else's. Come on, he's waiting to meet you, and he doesn't wait for anyone. She led him toward the group. As they walked, Dylan said quietly, You look like you didn't sleep. Vivian shot him a sideways glance, caught off guard. I didn't. How? Same way I knew about the building. You watch things long enough, you learn to read them. He nodded slightly. You read markets. I read people and machines. Not that different. She had no answer for that, and it unsettled her more than she wanted to admit that this man could read her as easily as she read everyone else. She'd spent her whole life being the one who saw. Being seen was a foreign country. Marcus Webb stepped forward and put out his hand. You must be the Navy man. Dylan Carter. He shook it. Firm, brief, respectful. Marcus Webb. I'm told you found something my whole industry missed. The old man's eyes were shrewd and warm at once. I've been doing this 50 years, son. I don't scare easy, and I don't flatter. So tell me straight, what did you feel standing up there? And something in the way the old man asked it, what did you feel, and not what did you calculate, told Dylan this man was the real thing. He answered straight. The 7th floor didn't ring right, Dylan said. I was running a cable up the east stairwell and I stopped on 7 because I don't know how to say it to an engineer. The floor felt like it was carrying weight it wasn't built to carry. Like when you hear an engine and one cylinder's working harder than the others. You can't see it. You feel it in the sound. He shrugged, a little self-conscious. So I looked at the transfer beam, and the column ties, and the load path didn't make sense to me. It was like they'd changed the design halfway, and made the beam do a job the columns should be doing. And then downstairs, I saw the drainage on the east foundation running toward the primary steel instead of away from it, and I thought that's going to hold water against the load-bearing members every spring. That's the whole thing. I'm not an engineer, that's just what I saw. There was a silence among the engineers. Dylan felt it and braced for the polite dismissal. It didn't come. Marcus Webb was staring at him with something close to wonder. They changed the design halfway, the old man repeated softly. Son, that's exactly what happened. There was a mid-project value engineering change on the 7th floor transfer system. It's buried in 400 pages of revisions. You looked at it for how long? Maybe 10 minutes, in the dark, with a flashlight. Marcus Webb turned to Vivian. I've got engineers who studied this building for a month and didn't catch what he caught in 10 minutes with a flashlight. He turned back to Dylan. Walk me up there. Show me exactly what you saw. Every instinct you had, I want to hear it, even the ones you can't explain. Especially the ones you can't explain. They spent the next 3 hours in the building. Dylan walked Marcus Webb and his team up the east stairwell to the 7th floor, and he showed them the transfer beam, and he stood in the exact spot where the floor had felt wrong. And Marcus put his hand on the beam and closed his eyes for a moment, like an old doctor listening for a heartbeat, and then he started giving orders to his team in the clipped language of a man who has just confirmed his worst suspicion. Get me ultrasonic testing on this weld and this one. I want the original design intent, and the as-built pulled and laid side by side. And somebody get me the change order that authorized this transfer redesign because I want to know whose name is on it. At one point, one of the younger engineers, a man about Dylan's age, sharp suit, sharper attitude, muttered just loud enough, This is insane. We're taking apart a building because a mechanic had a feeling. Marcus Webb rounded on him faster than a 70-year-old man should be able to move. Do you know why buildings fall down, Daniel? Not because the math is wrong. The math is almost never wrong. Buildings fall down because everybody in the room assumed somebody else had checked the thing they were all too proud to check themselves. He pointed at Dylan. This man had no reason to lie, no degree to protect, and no ego in the game. He just told the truth about what he saw. That's the rarest instrument on this entire site. You'd do well to learn from him instead of sneering at him. The young engineer went red and shut up. Dylan hadn't asked for the defense, and it made him uncomfortable to be championed, but he caught Vivian watching the whole exchange from a few feet away, and there was something in her face he couldn't read, a kind of quiet satisfaction, like she'd been proven right about something that mattered to her. By 5 o'clock, Marcus Webb had seen enough. He gathered everyone in the half-finished lobby, took off his hard hat, and delivered his verdict with the bluntness of a man who'd stopped being afraid of powerful people decades ago. Vivian, here's where we are. Your Navy man is right, and it's worse than the report suggested. That transfer beam is carrying loads it was never designed for because of a value engineering change that should never have been approved. Right now, today, the building is stable, but it has no margin. No safety factor to speak of on the 7th floor. And with that drainage flaw feeding water to the foundation steel, you're looking at corrosion that will eat into your load capacity year over year. This building would probably have stood for 5, maybe 8 years. And then one cold spring with the wrong load and the wrong ice on the wrong day. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The lobby was very quiet. "What do I do?" Vivian asked. And Dylan noticed she didn't ask what will it cost, or how do we spin it. She asked what to do. "You stop," Marcus said simply. "You halt occupancy. You open up the 7th floor, and you re-engineer that transfer system properly, and you tear out that drainage and redo it right. It'll cost you a fortune, and it'll set you back the better part of a year. And it's not optional. Not if you want to sleep at night." He looked at her steadily. "The good news is, you found it now. 6 months from now, there'd be families in here. You'd never have gotten them out in time to fix it. You'd have been trapped occupied building known defect impossible choice. You found it in the one window where you can actually save it." He glanced at Dylan. "You want to know who saved you a fortune and a funeral? He's standing right there in a Navy uniform." Vivian Hale turned and looked at Dylan Carter across the raw concrete lobby, and for a moment, neither of them said anything, and the engineers pretended to study their clipboards. "Do it," Vivian said finally to Marcus, but her eyes stayed on Dylan. "All of it. Whatever it costs. Halt occupancy today. Draft the fix. I want it done right, and I want it done fast, and I don't want a single corner cut. And if anyone in my organization pushes back on the cost, you send them to me personally." Marcus Webb smiled the smile of an old man who has just watched someone choose to be a good person when it would have been so much easier not to. "That's why I still work, Vivian, for the ones who say that." He put his hard hat back on. "I'll have a full plan on your desk in 72 hours. Carter," he shook Dylan's hand again. "If you ever get tired of the Navy, son, you come find me. I'll make you a structural inspector and pay you what you're worth, which is a hell of a lot more than you're getting. I mean that." "Thank you, sir," Dylan said, and meant it, though they both knew he wouldn't take it. The Navy was who he was, not just what he did. The engineers filed out. The SUVs began to pull away, and in a few minutes it was just Dylan and Vivian standing in the empty lobby of the building he'd saved the late afternoon light coming gray through the plastic sheeting over the windows. "You did that," Vivian said quietly. "Webb did that. His whole team. They confirmed it. You found it." She turned to face him fully. "Do you understand what you prevented today?" Mr. Carter Marcus doesn't exaggerate, ever. When he says funeral, he means funeral. You walked into a bar to have a beer, and you left having saved lives that will never know your name. People who live in this building someday put their kids to bed on the 7th floor, and never once know that a Navy mechanic they never met is the reason the walls held. Dylan looked down at his boots. He wasn't good at being thanked. Praise made him want to leave the room. "It's just what anybody would have done." "No." Her voice was firm. "It isn't. That's the thing you don't understand about yourself. It isn't what anybody would have done. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who would have looked at that beam, understood the problem, done the math, and then calculated whether it was cheaper to fix it or to settle the lawsuits later. I have watched people run that math, Mr. Carter, in rooms with very good coffee. You're the only person I've met in years who didn't run it, who just told the truth because someone's kid might sleep here." Dylan met her eyes. That's a sad way to live, running that math. Yes, Vivian said, and her voice cracked just slightly on the single word. It is. For a moment, something passed between them, some recognition, and then Dylan looked at his watch, and the spell broke. I've got to go, he said. Lily's at Mrs. Alvarez's. I promised her tacos. It's Tuesday. Tuesday's tacos. Lily, Vivian said. Your daughter. 8 years old. Just lost a tooth. Whistles when she talks now. A grin cracked across his tired face, sudden and real, and Vivian realized it was the first time she'd seen him smile, and it transformed him entirely. Best thing I ever did. Only thing I ever did that matters. Her mother, Vivian started, then stopped herself. I'm sorry. That's not my business. Dylan was quiet for a second. Past, 6 years ago. It's been me and Lily since she was 2. He said it plainly, the way a man says a thing he's said 1,000 times, the grief worn smooth as a river stone. So, tacos. Can't be late. She waits at the window. He started toward the door. Mr. Carter. Vivian's voice stopped him. He turned, and Vivian Hale, who had a lawyer on retainer to handle payments and never once thought about money as a personal thing, found herself unsure how to say what she needed to say. The payment. For today. And for last night. There's a process my office will. You don't have to pay me for last night, Dylan said. Last night was just talking. You saved me $400 million and a wrongful death catastrophe by talking. I didn't do it for the money, Ms. Hale. I know. She stepped closer. That's precisely why I want to pay you properly. Because you didn't do it for the money, and men who don't do things for money are exactly the men who deserve to be paid. Let me. Please. And that last word, please, came out of her strangely unfamiliar in her own mouth, a word she almost never had to use. Dylan studied her for a long moment. And then something in him relented. Not the pride, but the exhaustion underneath it. The years of split knuckles and $40 water heaters and stretched paychecks and a little girl who needed shoes. For the consulting today, he said carefully. Your normal rate for a specialist. That's fair. That's honest work, and I'll take honest pay for it. But not for last night. Last night's a gift. You don't pay for gifts. That's what makes them gifts. Vivian Hale looked at this man setting boundaries around his own dignity with such quiet precision, and she thought she had never in her life met anyone so poor and so utterly unbuyable at the same time. All right, she said softly. Your rate for today, and last night's a gift. She paused. Thank you for the gift, Mr. Carter. He nodded. And then, because he was who he was, he added, You did good today too, you know. You could have buried it. Webb basically said so. Most people with your kind of money would have. You didn't. He met her eyes. That took something. So, whatever you're feeling bad about, and I can tell you're feeling bad about something you don't have to, you did right when it counted. That's all any of us can do. And with that, Dylan Carter, who had no idea he'd just seen straight through to the exact thing that had kept a billionaire awake all night, the shame she'd told no one, turned and walked out of the building to go take his daughter for Tuesday tacos. Vivian stood alone in the lobby of the tower he'd saved in the gray light, holding the words "you did right when it counted," like something warm pressed into her cold hands. Nobody talked to her like that. Nobody in her entire world would have dared to look at Vivian Hale and gently tell her she could stop punishing herself. They flattered her, or feared her, or wanted something from her. This man had done none of those things. He'd just seen that she was hurting and told her the truth to make it stop. She pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long moment. Then she called Catherine Reyes. Catherine, the Carter file. What did you find? More than you'd expect, less than there should be, Catherine said. 8 years Navy exemplary record, 2 commendations he never talks about. Widower wife died 6 years ago. Complications after an illness left him with a 2-year-old. Raises the daughter alone. Works constant side jobs to make ends meet. There's a medical debt still on the books from his wife's treatment that he's been paying down for 6 years. A pause. Vivian, the man saved your building, and he's carrying a debt he inherited from watching his wife die. It doesn't sit right if you want my honest opinion. Vivian closed her eyes. No, she said. It doesn't. What do you want to do? Vivian looked out through the plastic sheeting at the parking lot, where a beat-up truck was pulling out through the gate heading home to a little girl waiting at a window for tacos. I don't know yet, she said. But I'm not going to let that man carry that debt alone. Not after today. Find out exactly what's owed. And Catherine, do it quietly. He has more pride than anyone I've ever met. If he thinks it's charity, he'll refuse it and never speak to me again. She watched the truck disappear into traffic. This has to be done right or not at all. Understood. A pause. Can I ask you something, Vivian? In 9 years, I've never seen you like this. What is it about him? Vivian Hale watched the empty road where the truck had been, and she thought about a man who'd been offered money and asked for less, who'd been thanked and looked embarrassed, who'd seen straight through her armor to the wound underneath and been kind about it. He doesn't want anything from me, she said finally. Do you understand what that's like, Catherine? To meet a person who genuinely doesn't want anything from you. I didn't know how tired I was of being wanted from until I met someone who wasn't doing it. Catherine was quiet a moment. That sounds lonely, Vivian. What you just described. Yes, Vivian said softly, still looking at the empty road. I suppose it does. She ended the call. She stood alone a while longer in the tower that a stranger had saved. And then she put on her coat and stepped out into the evening and told her driver to take her home up to the 52nd floor, and all that glass and all that silence. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, the silence didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like something she wanted to escape. And somewhere across the city, in a small warm kitchen that smelled like taco seasoning, a Navy dad was listening to his 8-year-old daughter whistle her way through the story of her whole entire day. And he was laughing so hard he had to sit down, and he had already half forgotten the billionaire in the plain coat, while she, 52 floors up, could not stop thinking about him at all. The medical debt turned out to be $11,000. Catherine Reyes laid the number in front of Vivian 2 days later, along with the paper trail, 6 years of payments, $40 and $50 at a time. A man chipping away at the cost of his wife's dying, one paycheck at a time, while raising a child and serving his country and fixing strangers' furnaces in the dark. $11,000 was less than Vivian spent on a dinner she'd cancel at the last minute. To Dylan Carter, it was a mountain he'd been carrying up a hill for 6 years with no top in sight. I could clear it this afternoon, Vivian said, staring at the figure. One wire transfer. It's nothing. You could, Catherine agreed carefully. And he would find out because a debt that vanishes gets noticed, and he would know exactly who did it. And based on everything I've learned about this man, she chose her words, I think he'd be more hurt than helped. Pride like his isn't vanity, Vivian. It's the last thing he owns outright. You'd be taking it from him to make yourself feel better. Vivian sat with that. It was, she realized, the truest thing anyone had said to her in a long time. And it stung. Because Catherine was right. Part of her wanting to erase the debt was about Dylan. And part of it was about the shame that hadn't left her since the night at the bar. The need to do something to make herself feel less like the kind of person who ran the math in rooms with good coffee. Then what do I do? She asked. And it was the second time in a week she'd asked that question out loud. And both times it had been about this man, and she noticed that too. You give him work, Catherine said. Real work. Not charity dressed as work. You have a portfolio full of buildings, Vivian. You just learned the hard way that your 6-figure engineers miss things a man with the right eyes catches in 10 minutes. So hire the eyes. Pay him what the work is worth. Let him earn his way out of that debt with his own hands and his own dignity intact. He'll never take a gift, but he'll take a job. That's who he is. Vivian looked at her chief of staff of 9 years and felt a rush of something like gratitude. When did you get so wise about people, Catherine? I've worked for you for 9 years, Catherine said dryly. I've had to be. So that was how it began, not with a grand gesture, but with a phone call. Chim, Dylan was under a Buick in Mrs. Alvarez's driveway on Saturday morning, Lily sitting on an overturned bucket nearby, narrating a very long and complicated story about a girl at school named Destiny, who had allegedly eaten a whole tube of glue when his phone rang. He rolled out from under the car, wiped his hands on a rag, and saw the number. Carter. Mr. Carter. Catherine Reyes. He was getting used to that crisp voice now. Do you have a moment? I've got a Buick with a bad alternator and an 8-year-old telling me about a glue-eating incident, but sure, go ahead. He heard something that might have been a laugh, quickly controlled. Ms. Hale has a proposal for you, a professional one. She'd like to bring you on as a consultant. Not for Riverside, that's handled. Now the fix is underway. For her wider portfolio, she owns or finances a significant number of structures. Mr. Carter, and after what happened at Riverside, she's decided she wants a certain kind of eyes doing walkthroughs on her properties, yours specifically, paid at a specialist's rate on your own schedule entirely around your Navy obligations. Dylan was quiet. Lily had stopped talking and was watching him with the frank curiosity of a child who can always tell when a phone call matters. Why me? He said finally. She's got a whole firm. Webb's people. Real engineers. She has, Catherine said. And Marcus Webb himself told her that you caught in 10 minutes what his team missed in a month. Mr. Carter, I'll be direct with you because I've gathered you prefer it. This isn't charity. Ms. Hale doesn't do charity, it's genuinely not in her nature. This is her being ruthless in the way she's always ruthless. You are in her assessment a competitive advantage she'd be a fool not to secure. She would rather pay you than lose you to the next person who figures out what you are. That's the whole of it. Dylan looked at the Buick. He looked at Lily. He thought about the $11,000 and the mountain and the hill and the shoes and the brakes on his truck that he'd been nursing along for months. What's the rate? He asked. Catherine told him. There was a long silence on Dylan's end. Lily watched her father's face do something she didn't have a word for. Say that again, Dylan said quietly. Catherine said it again. That's... Dylan stopped. It was more for a single walkthrough than he sometimes made in 2 weeks of side jobs. He knew immediately that it was too much, that it was Vivian's way of paying him more than the market would, and every instinct in him bristled against it. That's too high. That's not a real rate, that's her being generous, and I told her I don't take charity. Mr. Carter. Catherine's voice was patient. I anticipated you'd say exactly that, so I'm authorized to tell you something. That number is what Miss Hale pays Marcus Webb's senior inspectors. I have the contracts in front of me. It is to the dollar the market rate for the work she's asking you to do. If anything, given that you found what Webb's people didn't, she thinks it's a bargain. A pause. It only feels like charity because you've spent your life being underpaid. That's not the same thing as it being too much. Take the fair rate, Mr. Carter. You've earned the right to be paid what you're worth for once. And that you've spent your life being underpaid landed somewhere deep in Dylan Carter, because it was true, and no one had ever said it to him. And he sat there in Mrs. Alvarez's driveway with grease on his hands and his daughter watching, and felt something crack open in his chest that he'd kept sealed for years. Dad, Lily said. Is it good news or bad news? Dylan looked at his daughter. I don't know yet, Bug. Then into the phone. I'd have to see the buildings. I'm not signing anything until I know it's honest work I can actually do. I'm not going to take a rate like that to rubber stamp something. If she wants my eyes, she gets my real opinion, even when it costs her. Even when it's inconvenient. That's the deal, or there's no deal. That, Catherine said. And there was warmth in it now. Real warmth is precisely why she wants you. I'll send you the first 3 properties. Review them on your own time. If you find nothing wrong, you tell her so, and you still get paid for looking. If you find something, you tell her the truth. That's the entire job. Do we have an arrangement? Dylan looked at the Buick and the bucket and the little girl and the whole small, hard shape of his life, and he felt for the first time in 6 years the ground shift very slightly under his feet in a direction that wasn't down. Yeah, he said. We've got an arrangement. Wonderful. Ms. Hale will be pleased. Catherine hesitated, then seemed to decide something. She's been different since she met you, Mr. Carter. I've worked for her 9 years and I've never seen it. I don't know what you did, but whatever it was good for her. I thought you should know. Dylan didn't know what to say to that. I just told her the truth. Yes, Catherine said. I'm beginning to think that's a much rarer gift than you realize. And she was gone. Dylan sat in the driveway holding the phone. Lily climbed off her bucket and came to stand in front of him, hands on her hips, tooth gap and all. Dad, your face is doing a thing. What thing? The thing it does when something happens. She squinted at him. Good happens or bad happens? Dylan pulled his daughter into a one-armed hug, grease and all, and pressed his mouth to the top of her head. Good baby, he said, and his voice was thick. I think maybe good happens. The first 3 properties were clean. Dylan reviewed them on his own time over the next 2 weeks, evenings after his shift a Sunday afternoon while Lily was at a birthday party. And 2 of the 3 were genuinely well built. And he said so plainly in writing, and felt strange accepting money for delivering good news. The third had a minor issue with a stairwell railing anchor that wasn't dangerous but wasn't right either, and he flagged it. And 3 days later, Catherine emailed to tell him it had been corrected and to thank him. And on the 4th property, he found something real. It was a parking structure, 6 levels, 20 years old, that Vivian's company had acquired as part of a larger portfolio. Dylan walked it on a Sunday alone, the way he liked to work. And on the 4th level, he stopped and he felt it again, that wrongness. The engine running with 1 cylinder laboring. He spent 2 hours up there with a flashlight and a level and his hands, and when he was done, he was certain. Water had been getting into the post-tension cables for years through failed sealant. The corrosion was hidden, exactly the kind of thing you couldn't see until a cable let go. And when a post-tension cable lets go, in a parking structure full of cars and people Dylan knew, having read about, exactly such a failure that had killed people in another city years ago, it doesn't fail quietly. He called Catherine that same evening. The parking structure, the one on 5th, get it closed, tonight if you can. Closed, Mr. Carter, that structure is fully occupied. It's Catherine. His voice was flat and hard, the voice he'd used in the Navy when something was about to go wrong and there wasn't time for feelings. There's water in the post-tension cables on level 4, and they've been corroding for years. I've seen what happens when those let go. It killed people in Pittsburgh a while back. I'm not telling you it's going to fail tomorrow. I'm telling you, I don't know that it won't, and neither does anybody else, and that's reason enough. Get Webb's people out there to confirm it, but close level 4 tonight, and if I'm wrong, you can all laugh at the mechanic in the morning. I'll take the laughing. I won't take the other thing. There was a silence. I'll call Ms. Hale directly, Catherine said. Stay by your phone. 20 minutes later, Dylan's phone rang, and it was Vivian. Tell me what you found, she said. No greeting. All business, but underneath it, that thread of urgency he'd heard the first night. He told her. All of it. The failed sealant, the hidden corrosion, the Pittsburgh collapse, the reason he couldn't, in good conscience, let it stay open. Vivian didn't hesitate for even a second. It's closed. I'm ordering it now. Level 4 tonight, the whole structure by morning pending Webb's inspection. Catherine's already drafting the notices. You're not going to ask me if I'm sure. You were sure about Riverside, Vivian said simply. And Marcus Webb told me you have hands that hear things. If your hands are telling you people could die in my parking structure, then my parking structure is closed until proven safe. I'm not going to run the math, Mr. Carter. A pause, and then quieter, almost wry. You cured me of running the math, remember? Dylan closed his eyes. Something in his chest loosened. Yeah, he said. I remember. Marcus will confirm it in the morning, Vivian said. And when he does, and I already know he will, you'll have saved lives twice in 1 month. A Navy mechanic who fixes engines on the side. Her voice softened. Do you have any idea how remarkable you are, Mr. Carter? Any idea at all? Dylan shifted, uncomfortable as always with praise. I just don't want anybody's kid getting hurt in a building with my name anywhere near it. Yes, Vivian said. I'm learning that about you. You measure everything by whether somebody's kid gets hurt. A pause. It's a good way to measure things. I wish more people in my world used it. They stayed on the phone a moment longer than the business required. Neither of them quite ended the call. How's Lily? Vivian asked finally, and it surprised them both that she'd remembered the name that she'd asked. Dylan blinked. She's good. She's good. She's got a school project due. She's supposed to build a model of a bridge out of popsicle sticks and glue, and I'm not allowed to help because it's her project, but she keeps asking me questions about triangles and load, and why bridges don't fall down, and pretending she's not asking for help. He laughed softly. She's going to be an engineer. She doesn't know it yet. But she's going to be an engineer. A bridge out of popsicle sticks, Vivian repeated, and there was something wistful in it. And you know exactly why bridges don't fall down. I know a little about it, yeah. She's lucky, Vivian said quietly, to have a father who knows why bridges don't fall down, and who won't do her project for her. A pause. My father would have hired someone to build the bridge, entered it under my name, and won the science fair, and then told me at dinner how proud he was of my work. She stopped as if surprised she'd said it out loud. I don't know why I told you that. Dylan was quiet for a moment. Because it's true, he said gently, and I'd guess you don't get a lot of chances to say true things to people. Same as me. There was a silence on the line, and in it something shifted between them, some distance closing that had nothing to do with buildings or money. No, Vivian said. I don't. The parking structure closure made the local news the next morning a routine safety inspection. The official statement said no cause for alarm, and by noon, Marcus Webb had confirmed everything Dylan found and more. The corrosion was worse than even Dylan had guessed. Webb told Vivian privately that the structure had maybe 2 years left before a cable failure became likely, and that on a busy weekend, that failure could have brought down a section of the deck with cars and families on it. Your Navy man, Webb said, just saved you from a headline you'd never have recovered from, and saved a lot of people who'll never know his name. Vivian, I've been doing this 50 years. I've met 3 people in my whole career with what he has. 3. You need to hold on to him. I'm trying, Vivian said. He's not the easiest man to hold on to. He won't take anything he hasn't earned. Webb laughed. Then you finally met someone as stubborn as you. God help you both. That afternoon, Vivian did something she hadn't done in 15 years. She left the office in the middle of the day, told her driver she'd take the rest of the day herself, and drove. Actually drove her own hands on the wheel of a car she rarely used to a hardware store on the edge of the city. She walked the aisles feeling entirely out of place until a teenager in an orange apron asked if she needed help. I need popsicle sticks, Vivian Hale said. A lot of them. And the kind of glue that dries fast. And she thought about it. Do you have anything about bridges, how they work for a child? The teenager blinked. We got a book section, kids' science stuff. Show me, said the woman who controlled a global infrastructure empire, and she followed a 16-year-old through a hardware store and bought 400 popsicle sticks, a bottle of fast-drying glue, and an illustrated children's book called Why Bridges Don't Fall Down. And she had no clear idea why she was doing it, except that a man had told her his daughter was going to be an engineer, and something about that had made her chest ache in a way she didn't have a name for. She had them delivered to Dylan's address. She had it from Catherine's file with a note. She wrote and rewrote the note 6 times. In the end, she kept it simple. Mr. Carter, for the engineer. Tell her the secret is triangles. A triangle can't be squished. That's why bridges use them. She'll figure out the rest. V. Hale, not charity, supplies. There's a difference, as you taught me. Chime. Dylan came home that evening to find a box on his porch. He carried it inside, confused, and opened it at the kitchen table with Lily hovering. and when he saw what it was, the 400 popsicle sticks, the glue, the book, and read the note, he had to sit down. "Dad, what is it?" "What is it?" Lily was bouncing. "It's—" Dylan cleared his throat. "It's bridge supplies, for your project, from a—" He searched for the word, "from a friend." "What friend?" "We don't have friends who send bridge supplies." "We do now, apparently." He handed her the book. "She says the secret is triangles. A triangle can't get squished. That's why bridges use them." Lily opened the book like it was treasure, and Dylan sat at the table with the note in his hand and read it again. "Not charity. Supplies. There's a difference, as you taught me." She'd listened. That was the thing that got him. Not the gift was thoughtful, but it was the fact that she'd taken the one thing he'd said to her, the line about gifts and dignity, and she'd threaded it back through this so carefully, so exactly, that it couldn't possibly wound his pride. A billionaire had gone to the trouble of understanding a mechanic well enough to give him something without hurting him. Nobody had ever taken that kind of care with him. Nobody. He picked up his phone and called her. She answered on the first ring. "Mr. Carter? You bought my daughter 400 popsicle sticks." "I did." A pause. "Was that all right? I wasn't sure if—" "It was more than all right." His voice was rough. "The note. Not charity supplies. You—" He stopped, gathered himself. "You listened to me, in the bar and after. People don't listen to me, Ms. Hale. They hear me. There's a difference. You listened." "Vivian," she said quietly. "I think after 400 popsicle sticks, you could call me Vivian." Dylan almost laughed. "Vivian, thank you. Really. She's over there right now reading about triangles like it's a comic book. You made her whole week. You made mine honestly." "Good," Vivian said. And Dylan could hear even through the phone that something in her voice was different, lighter, unguarded, almost shy. "I've never bought a child a gift before, Mr. Dylan. I didn't know how. I stood in a hardware store and let a teenager help me. It was mortifying, and it was the best afternoon I've had in years, and I don't fully understand either of those things." Dylan looked across the kitchen at his daughter, hunched over a book about bridges, whistling faintly through the gap in her teeth, and he felt the strangest tightening in his chest, a warmth, and under it, a warning, the old caution of a man who'd learned that good things get taken away. "Vivian," he said carefully, "can I ask you something, and you don't have to answer?" "All right. What is this? What are we doing here? Because a month ago, I was a guy in a bar you'd never met, and now you're buying my kid bridge supplies, and I'm walking your buildings and calling you by your first name, and I—" He stopped. "I've got a daughter to think about. I can't afford to be confused about things. So I'm just going to ask straight. What is this?" There was a long silence on the line. Dylan waited. He was good at waiting. "I don't know," Vivian said finally, and it was the most honest he'd ever heard her. "I genuinely don't know, Dylan. I've spent my whole life knowing exactly what everything is. Every relationship, every transaction, every person's angle. I always know what it is. And I don't know what this is. All I know is that I've been less lonely in the last month than I've been in 15 years, and it started the night a man in a bar told me the truth and asked for nothing." A pause. "That's not an answer. I'm sorry. It's the only honest one I have." Dylan closed his eyes. Across the kitchen, Lily held up a triangle she'd made from 3 popsicle sticks and glue, and announced to no one in particular, "It can't get squished. Look, it can't get squished." "Yeah," Dylan said softly into the phone, watching his daughter. "That's not an answer, but it's honest, and honest is enough for now." "Is it?" Vivian asked, and there was something almost vulnerable in it. "It's enough for now," Dylan said. "We don't have to know what it is. We just have to be honest about it as we go. That's how you build anything that lasts, Vivian. One honest piece at a time. Ask Lily. She's learning it right now with popsicle sticks." And on the 52nd floor of a glass tower across the city, Vivian Hale stood at her window, holding the phone, listening to an 8-year-old shout in the background that a triangle couldn't get squished, and she felt something she had not felt in so long that it took her a moment to recognize it. and when she did, it frightened her almost as much as it thrilled her. She felt like she belonged somewhere. "One honest piece at a time," she repeated softly. "All right, Dylan, I can do that." "Good," he said. "Now I've got to go supervise the construction of a bridge that cannot get squished. Good night, Vivian." "Good night, Dylan." She paused. "Tell Lily. Tell her the secret to the whole thing is that the triangles have to share the load. No single one carries it all. That's the real secret." Dylan was quiet for a second, because he knew, and she knew, that she wasn't only talking about the bridge. "I'll tell her," he said. "Good night." He hung up. He crossed the kitchen. He sat down next to his daughter, this small, fierce girl who was going to be an engineer, and he picked up a popsicle stick and he said, "Okay, Bug, let me tell you the real secret. It's not just the triangles. It's that they share the load. No single one carries the whole weight. You spread it out. That's how nothing breaks." Lily looked up at him with total seriousness. "Where'd you learn that?" Dylan looked at the note still sitting on the table in a billionaire's careful handwriting. "A friend taught me," he said. "Just now. Come on, let's build something that lasts." The bridge shared the load, and it won third place at the science fair, and Lily came home with a green ribbon and a fury about it that lasted 3 days. "Third," she kept saying at dinner, in the bath, at bedtime. Destiny got second and her dad built hers. I could tell. There's no way a kid did those welds. "You mean the glue joints?" Dylan said. "The welds," Lily insisted. "And mine could hold a whole textbook and hers couldn't, and I proved it, and I still got third, and it's not fair." Dylan sat on the edge of her bed and thought about how much of his daughter was already exactly like him. The eye for when something wasn't built right, the quiet fury at unfairness, the refusal to let a lie stand just because it wore a nicer ribbon. "You want to know something, Bug? Your bridge was better. You and I both know it was better. And sometimes the better thing doesn't get the ribbon because the person handing out ribbons couldn't see what they were looking at." He tucked the blanket around her. "That happens a lot in life, more than it should. And it's going to make you mad every single time because you're the kind of person who can see the difference. But here's the thing you have to remember." He tapped the green ribbon on her nightstand. "You know what you built. That's the part nobody can take. The ribbon's just decoration. The truth is yours." Lily considered this with the gravity of an 8-year-old weighing a large idea. "Did somebody ever give you third when you should have got first?" Dylan thought about a lifetime of it. The side jobs and the $40 water heaters. The insults swallowed for the sake of peace. The years of being the man nobody noticed fixing the world quietly, thanked with a nod. "Yeah," he said. "More times than I can count." "And you knew what you built?" "I knew what I built." Lily nodded slowly, filing it away in whatever vast and serious vault an 8-year-old keeps her father's wisdom in. Then she said, "Apropos of nothing, the way children do. Is the popsicle friend a girl?" Dylan went still. "What?" "The friend who sent the sticks. The one who taught you about sharing the load. Is it a girl?" Dylan was quiet a moment. He'd learned a long time ago that lying to Lily didn't work. She read faces the way he read engines. "Yeah," he said. "It's a girl. A woman. Her name's Vivian. Do you like her?" "Bug. Because your voice does a thing when you talk to her on the phone." Lily said, matter of fact, merciless. "It goes soft. It only goes soft for me and Grandma. Now it goes soft for the popsicle friend." Dylan opened his mouth to deny it, and found he couldn't, because his daughter had just performed a structural inspection on his own heart and found the load-bearing member he'd been pretending wasn't there. "I don't know how I feel yet," he said honestly. "It's complicated, Lily. She's a very different kind of person from us. Her life is different. Big different." "Different how?" Dylan searched for how to explain it. "She has a lot of money, a whole lot, more than you can imagine." Lily frowned. "Is she nice?" And there it was, the only question that had ever mattered to his daughter, cutting straight through everything Dylan had been tangling himself up in for weeks. Not is she rich, or is she pretty, or is it complicated? Is she nice? "Yeah," Dylan said, and his voice went soft again, the way it did, and he heard it, and didn't fight it this time. Yeah, Bug. She's nice. She's a little sad and a little lonely, and she tries not to show it. But underneath it, she's about the nicest person I've met in a long time. She just didn't have anybody teaching her how to show it. Lily nodded, deeply satisfied, as if the entire matter were now settled. Then she should come to dinner. We could have tacos. Everybody likes tacos. She yawned, the enormous jaw-cracking yawn of a child hitting the wall of the day. Even sad people like tacos. Dylan laughed softly and kissed her forehead. Go to sleep, engineer. We'll talk about tacos another day. Tuesday, Lily mumbled, already halfway gone. Tuesday's tacos. She can come Tuesday. Dylan turned off the light and stood in the doorway a moment, watching his daughter's breathing settle, and he thought about a woman, 52 floors up, in a glass tower, alone in all that silence. And he thought even sad people like tacos. He didn't invite her that Tuesday, or the one after. It felt too fast, too big, too much, opening the door of his small, careful life and letting in someone whose life was so unimaginably large. He kept it professional. He walked her buildings. He found 2 more problems over the following weeks, neither as dire as the parking structure, but both real, and each time Vivian acted on his word without hesitation, and each time they talked on the phone longer than the work required, and each time Dylan hung up, feeling like the floor had shifted a little further in a direction that wasn't down. Something was being built between them. One honest piece at a time, and they both knew it, and neither of them named it because naming it might make it fall. And then Preston Marsh came back. Dylan had all but forgotten the loud developer a mosquito swatted at gone. But Preston Marsh had not forgotten Dylan. Marsh had spent weeks stewing over the night in the bar, over the mechanic who'd made him look small in front of his own men. And then Marsh had learned, because men like Marsh always eventually learn, that the Riverside project he'd been the loud face of had been halted, torn open its 7th floor, re-engineered at staggering cost, and that the halt had come down from the silent money behind the project, from a name he'd never been allowed to know. And somewhere in his stewing, Marsh had connected the mechanic to the halt, and it had curdled into something ugly. Dylan found out when Catherine called him on a Thursday, and her crisp voice had an edge in it he'd never heard. Mr. Carter, there's a situation. Preston Marsh has been talking to people. He's telling anyone who'll listen that you're a fraud, an unlicensed mechanic impersonating a structural engineer, that you've inserted yourself into projects to extort Ms. Hale, that you fabricated the Riverside issue to make yourself look important. A pause. It's slander. It's provably false, and normally I wouldn't even trouble you with it. But he's also filed a formal complaint with the Navy. He's alleging you're running an unlicensed engineering business on the side in violation of regulations. He's trying to get you disciplined, possibly discharged. The kitchen went very still around Dylan. He set down the wrench he'd been holding. Discharged, he repeated quietly. He's throwing everything he has at the wall, Mr. Carter. Most of it won't stick. But the Navy complaint is, it's the kind of thing that can create real problems, even when it's baseless. Investigations. Your record. Ms. Hale is aware, and she is, to put it mildly, furious. She wants to bring the full weight of her legal team down on him. She asked me to call you first because, and these are her words, it's his life on the line, not mine, and I won't do anything about it without his say. Dylan closed his eyes. There it was, again, the thing about her that got him. Even furious, even with all her power, she'd stopped to ask him first. She'd learned. One honest piece at a time. Put me on the phone with her, Dylan said. A moment later, Vivian's voice came through tight with a controlled anger he could feel radiating off the line. Dylan, I'm going to destroy him. I've already had my lawyers pull every permit that man has ever touched, and I promise you there are irregularities, there always are with his type, and by the time I'm... Vivian, stop. She stopped. Take a breath, Dylan said. You're spun up. I get it, but you're about to run downhill fast, and I need you to slow down for a second. He heard her breathing, heard her actually take the breath he'd asked for. All right, she said. I'm listening. But Dylan, this man is coming for your career, your record. The thing you love. I can't just... I know what he's coming for. Dylan's voice was steady, the flat calm of a man who'd been under fire before. Now let me think for a second instead of swinging. That's what he wants, you know. He wants us swinging. Men like Marsh, they can't beat you on the truth, so they try to drag you into the mud, where the truth doesn't matter, just noise. If you bring your whole army down on him, you know what it looks like. It looks like exactly what he's saying. Billionaire and her pet mechanic crushing an honest developer. He'd love that. That's the story he wants. There was a silence on the line, and then Vivian said slowly, "You're right. God, you're right. I was about to give him the exact narrative he's fishing for." "Yeah, so we don't do that." Dylan leaned against the counter thinking. The Navy complaint, let's take that first because that's the real one. Am I running an unlicensed engineering business? No, you're a consultant giving your observations. You've never signed an engineering document, never stamped a drawing, never claimed a license. Marcus Webb's licensed engineers make every actual determination. You point. They verify and certify. Legally, you're a specialist consultant, no different from a dozen other trades. Right. So the complaint's got no legs. It's just noise designed to cost me time and worry. Dylan nodded to himself. So here's what we do. We don't fight it loud. We answer it clean. I've got nothing to hide. Let the Navy look. My record's spotless. My side work is all legal and above board. I've paid my taxes on every dollar. And the consulting for you is a legitimate arrangement with a paper trail Catherine can produce in her sleep. We don't attack. We just open the books and let them see there's nothing there. The truth's the strongest thing we've got. Let's use it instead of throwing his kind of mud back at him. Vivian was quiet a long moment. Do you know, she said finally, that in my entire life, my instinct in a fight has always been to hit harder than the other person. Always. And you just in 30 seconds you found a better way, a stronger way. And it never would have occurred to me, not in 1,000 years. That's because you've spent your life fighting people who fight dirty, Dylan said. You had to learn to hit hard. But I learned something different in the Navy. You want to know the strongest position in any fight. It's the one where you've got nothing to hide and you're not afraid of the truth coming out. When you're clean, you don't have to swing. You just have to stand still and let them exhaust themselves throwing punches at nothing. He paused. I'm clean, Vivian. Marsh isn't. So the last thing I want to do is start a mud fight, because in a mud fight the clean man loses even when he wins. Let him keep talking. The more he talks, the more people see what he is. And if the Navy investigation hurts you anyway, if it's not fair, you told Lily yourself sometimes the better bridge gets third place. Dylan went quiet, surprised she'd remembered, surprised she'd thrown his own words back at him with such precision. You've been paying attention. I pay attention to everything you say, Vivian said, and then seemed slightly startled by her own honesty. I mean, yes, I remember. So, what if it's not fair? Then it's not fair, Dylan said simply. And I'll deal with it the way I deal with everything. But I'd rather lose fair and clean than win by becoming the kind of man Marsh already thinks I am. I've got a daughter watching how I handle this. That matters more to me than the outcome. She needs to see that her dad doesn't turn into a snake, even when a snake bites him. He paused. Can you understand that it might not make sense in your world? And on the 52nd floor, Vivian Hale pressed her hand to her mouth for a moment, because it made more sense than anything had made in years, and it made her ashamed of every scorched earth victory she'd ever celebrated. It makes sense, she said, her voice not quite steady. It makes more sense than everything I've done for 20 years. Dylan, She stopped, gathered herself. All right, we do it your way, clean. We answer the complaint, we open the books, we don't attack. But I'm putting my best attorney on it to make sure the Navy sees the full honest picture and Marsh's lies don't get to hide in the confusion. Not to fight dirty. To make sure the truth gets a fair hearing. Can you accept that much help? Essential. Dylan considered it. It wasn't charity. It was making sure a fair fight stayed fair. Yeah, he said. That I can accept. Thank you. And Dylan... Her voice dropped, lost its boardroom edge entirely. I want you to know something. If this had happened a year ago before I met you and some developer had come after a consultant of mine, I'd have crushed him without a second thought and felt nothing. I'd have called it Tuesday. And I would never have stopped to ask whether it was the right way or just the winning way. She searched for it. You've made me a person who has to ask that question now. And I don't know whether to thank you or resent you for it, because it was a lot easier when I didn't have a conscience whispering in your voice. Dylan laughed softly, surprised. That's about the nicest backhanded thing anybody's ever said to me. I mean it as the highest compliment I have. Then I'll take it as one. He paused, and something warm and uncertain moved through him, and before he could talk himself out of it, he said, Vivian, Lily wants you to come to dinner. The line went silent. She what? Tacos, Dylan said. It's a whole thing. Tuesday's tacos. She found out the popsicle friend was a woman named Vivian, and she's decided you should come to dinner because, and I'm quoting her directly, even sad people like tacos. He winced. Her words, not mine. She's 8. She's got no filter. There was another silence longer, and when Vivian spoke again, her voice was strange and thick. She called me a sad person. She said you were a little sad and a little lonely, and you tried not to show it. Dylan said gently. She's got a good eye. Gets it from me. I'm sorry, I know that's... No. Vivian's voice cracked. No, don't apologize. It's Dylan. Do you understand that a child I've met exactly 0 times just saw me more clearly than people who've worked beside me for a decade? That an 8-year-old took one look at the situation and diagnosed the thing I've spent 15 years and a fortune trying to hide. A wet, disbelieving laugh. She should be a structural inspector. She found the crack nobody else could see. She learned from the best, Dylan said softly. So, tacos. Tuesday. You don't have to. I know it's a lot. A billionaire in my little kitchen with a folding chair and a kid who won't stop talking about welds. It's not your world. Dylan. Vivian's voice steadied into something certain, something he'd never heard from her before. In my entire adult life, no one has ever invited me somewhere because they thought I might be lonely and could use a taco. Not once. Every invitation I've ever received wanted something from me. A donation, a connection, an angle. She took a breath. An 8-year-old just invited me to dinner because she decided I was sad and tacos might help. That is the single kindest thing that has happened to me in longer than I can remember. Yes, God, yes, I'll come. Tell her I'll come. What can I bring? Dylan felt something loosen in his chest, some door he'd been holding shut, swinging carefully open. Just yourself. Don't... He hesitated. Don't bring anything expensive, okay? Don't show up with something that costs more than my truck. She'll love you for you. You don't have to buy anything. Just come as a person. Just as a person, Vivian repeated softly. All right, I can do that. A pause. It's been a long time since anyone wanted just the person. I'd almost forgotten there was a person under all the rest of it. There is, Dylan said. I've seen her. She buys popsicle sticks and lets teenagers help her, and asks what she can bring to dinner. She's all right, that one. Lily's going to like her. Vivian laughed, and it was a real laugh, unguarded and slightly broken, and Dylan thought it might be the best sound he'd heard in years. Tuesday, she said. What time? 6. We eat at 6 because somebody's got a 9 o'clock bedtime and negotiates it down to 9:15 every single night, like it's a hostage situation. 6, Vivian said. I'll be there. And Dylan, thank you. For the invitation. For handling Marsh with more grace than I have in my whole body. She stopped. For all of it. For being the honest piece I get to build the rest around. Dylan stood in his small kitchen phone pressed to his ear and looked at the green third-place ribbon on the counter and the note in a billionaire's careful handwriting and the whole small, hard, beautiful shape of the life he'd built, one honest piece at a time. And he understood that it was about to get bigger and that for once he wasn't bracing for the ground to open up. See you Tuesday, Vivian, he said. But Marsh wasn't done. Because the night before the dinner, the Monday Dylan got a knock on his door at 9 p.m. after Lily was asleep, and when he opened it, Preston Marsh was standing on his porch. Dylan stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind him quiet so it wouldn't wake his daughter. "You've got about 10 seconds to explain why you're at my home." Marsh had been drinking. Dylan could smell it, could see it in the loose way the man held himself. "You cost me everything," Marsh said, and his voice shook. "That project was going to make my name. And you, a mechanic, you tore it apart. Do you have any idea who I was going to be?" "I know exactly what I did." Dylan said, his voice low and level and cold. "I stopped a building from killing people. Your project was going to fall down, Marsh. That's not opinion. Marcus Webb confirmed it. Families were going to move in, and the 7th floor was going to fail. I didn't cost you your name. Your name was going to be on a headstone maker's list either way. The only question was whether it'd be there for building a tower or for burying the people in it." Marsh flinched. Some part of him under the liquor and the rage knew it was true. "And here's the other thing," Dylan went on, stepping closer, keeping his voice down but letting the steel into it. "You filed a complaint with my Navy. You tried to take the one thing that's mine that I earned that has nothing to do with your building or your ego. You came at my career and my record because your feelings got hurt in a bar. So let me tell you how this is going to go." He was very close now, and there was something in his eyes that made the developer take a step back. "I'm not going to fight you dirty. I'm not going to sick lawyers on you, or dig up your permits, or leak your business to the papers, even though the woman you're really mad at could bury you before breakfast and wants to. You know why. Because I don't need to. I'm clean. You'll waste your money and your time throwing punches. And the Navy's going to open my books and find nothing because there's nothing there. And you're going to be left exactly where you are right now. A man on a stranger's porch at 9 o'clock at night, drunk alone, blaming everybody but himself." He paused. "That's not me doing something to you, Marsh. That's just you meeting yourself. I didn't do that, you did." Marsh stared at him, and something in his face crumpled the rage going out of it and leaving only the smallness underneath the frightened, empty smallness that all his loudness had been built to hide. "Go home," Dylan said gentler now. "Sleep it off, and drop the complaint because the only thing it's going to do is cost you money and make you look like exactly what you are. That's not a threat. It's just the truth. And the truth is the strongest thing either of us has got. You just never learned how to use it." He turned and went back inside and shut the door quietly so as not to wake his daughter, and he stood in the dark of his own hallway with his heart pounding, and then he heard through the door, after a long moment, the sound of Preston Marsh's footsteps going back down the porch steps and away into the night. Dylan leaned his back against the door and let out a long breath. Down the hall, Lily's breathing was slow and even undisturbed safe. He'd kept it that way. He'd kept the whole ugly thing on the other side of the door where she'd never have to know it happened. He picked up his phone and texted Vivian 2 words. "Marsh came by. It's handled. Clean. See you tomorrow." 3 dots appeared immediately. She'd been awake. Of course she'd been awake 52 floors up in all that silence. "Are you all right?" she wrote. "I'm fine. He's just a sad man who never learned what Lily learned this week." Which as Dylan looked down the dark hallway toward his sleeping daughter's room, toward the little engineer who was going to spend her whole life seeing what other people missed, and he typed the truest thing he knew. That you share the load. No single one carries the whole weight. That's how nothing breaks. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared and appeared again, and finally her answer came through, and Dylan stood in his dark hallway and read it 3 times. "Tomorrow I'll be at a dinner table with a man and a little girl who understand that. For the first time in my life I won't be carrying it alone. I don't have words for what that means to me. Good night, Dylan. Tell Lily her welds are perfect." "They're glue joints," Dylan wrote back, smiling in the dark. "They're welds," Vivian answered. "She's right. Good night." And Dylan Carter turned off his phone and checked the lock on the door that had kept the ugliness away from his daughter, and went down the hall to look in on the sleeping girl who had, without knowing it, taught a billionaire and her own tired father the only secret that had ever mattered, that you spread the weight, that you share the load, that nothing built to carry it all alone was ever built to last. Tomorrow, there would be tacos, and for the first time in 6 years, Dylan didn't lie awake bracing for the floor to open beneath him. He slept. She arrived at 5:58, and she was carrying a bag of oranges. Dylan opened the door, and there was Vivian Hale. No driver, no assistant, no coat that cost more than his truck, standing on his porch in jeans and a simple sweater, holding a paper bag of oranges, and looking more nervous than he'd ever heard her sound on the phone. "You said don't bring anything expensive," she said, holding up the bag like evidence. "And I panicked. I stood in the grocery store for 20 minutes. I've closed billion-dollar deals with less agonizing than I put into this bag of oranges. I don't know how to come to dinner as just a person, so I brought oranges. Is that a thing people bring? I honestly don't know." Dylan looked at the oranges and looked at this woman who controlled ports and bridges and power grids, standing terrified on his doorstep over a bag of fruit, and something in his chest cracked wide open. "Oranges are perfect," he said. "Come in." She stepped inside, and Dylan watched her take in his small home. The worn couch, the folding chair pulled up to the table to make a third seat. The walls covered in a child's drawings, and a few framed photographs. One of a woman with Lily's exact smile that Vivian's eyes stopped on for just a moment before moving gently away. It was, he knew, smaller than her closet. And she looked at all of it not with pity, not with the polite blankness of the rich in a poor room, but with something like hunger, like a person looking through a window at a warmth they'd never been allowed inside. "It's not much," Dylan started the old reflex. "It's a home," Vivian said quietly. "I've lived in 6 residences on 3 continents, and not one of them was ever a home. Don't you dare apologize for it." She turned to him. "It's the nicest place I've ever been invited into. I mean that with my whole Vivienne." Lily came around the corner at a dead run and stopped short 3 feet away, planting herself with her hands on her hips, and looked the billionaire heiress up and down with the frank total assessment of an 8-year-old. "You're the popsicle friend," Lily announced. "I am," Vivian said, and Dylan watched her lower herself carefully to Lily's eye level, watched her do it the way a person does something they've never done and desperately want to get right. "You must be Lily. I've heard you're going to be an engineer." "I got 3rd place," Lily said dark. "My bridge was better than the one that got 2nd. Her dad built hers, I could tell. There's no way a kid did those welds." "Glue joints," Dylan murmured. "Welds," said Vivian and Lily at the exact same time, and then they both stopped and looked at each other, and something passed between them, some instant recognition, and Lily's suspicious little face broke into a delighted grin. "You know they're welds," Lily said. "I know they're whatever the builder says they are," Vivian said seriously. "And I know something else. I know that a bridge that holds a textbook when a fancier-looking bridge can't is the better bridge, and everyone in that room knew it, whether they gave you the ribbon or not. Do you know how I know? How? Because I look at buildings for a living," Vivian said. "Big ones. And I have learned the hard way that the thing that looks impressive and the thing that actually holds the weight are very often not the same thing. Your bridge held the weight. That's the only ribbon that matters." She paused. "Your dad taught me that, actually, about sharing the load. He said you taught it to him first." Lily turned and looked at her father with enormous eyes. "You told her about the load sharing." "I did, Bug." "That's my best thing," Lily said, awed. "That's my best thing, and you told the popsicle friend." "It was too good not to share," Dylan said, and his voice went soft the way it did, and Lily heard it and shot him a look that said, "See, it goes soft. I told you." And Dylan felt his ears go red. And then Lily did the thing that Dylan would remember for the rest of his life. She reached out, took Vivian Hale by the hand, this stranger, this billionaire, this woman she'd met 60 seconds ago, and said, "Come see my room. I have more bridges. I have a whole city I'm building, and none of it can get squished." And Vivian Hale, who had been agonized over by senators and courted by kings, let an 8-year-old lead her by the hand down a narrow hallway to see a city of popsicle sticks. And over her shoulder, she gave Dylan a look he'd never forget. A look of pure disbelieving wonder, the look of a person who has just been handed something they didn't know they were allowed to want. Dinner was tacos, and it was loud, and it was perfect. Lily talked without stopping about welds and glue joints, and destiny, and the glue-eating incident, and why triangles couldn't be squished, and the difference between a beam and a column, which she'd learned from the book Vivian sent, and now considered herself the world's leading authority on. Vivian asked her questions, real ones, and listened to the answers with a focus. Dylan usually only saw on people trying to close a deal. Except there was nothing to close here, nothing to gain. Just a woman genuinely delighted by a child, and Dylan watched it happen and felt something in his chest that he was afraid to name, because naming it might make it fall. At one point, Lily said, mouthful of taco, "Vivian, are you rich?" "Lily," Dylan said. "It's all right," Vivian said. She set down her taco and considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Yes, I'm very rich, Lily. Probably richer than you can imagine." Lily absorbed this. "Do you have a pool?" "I have several, actually." "Are you happy?" The table went quiet. Dylan started to intervene, but Vivian held up a hand gently and looked at the little girl across the table, and Dylan watched her decide to tell the truth. Because that was the currency of this house, and she'd already learned it. "No," Vivian said quietly. "Not for a long time I wasn't. I had all the pools and all the money and all the things, and I was one of the loneliest people you could ever meet. I didn't have a home. I didn't have anybody who wanted just me. I had a lot of people who wanted things from me, which isn't the same." She paused. "But I've been happier in the last 2 months than I've been in 15 years. And do you want to know why?" Lily nodded, rapt. "Because your dad told me the truth one night when nobody else would," Vivian said. "And because you invited me to tacos, even though you'd never met me, just because you thought I might be sad and lonely. And you were right. I was. And this—" She gestured at the small table, the folding chair, the drawings on the walls. "This is worth more than all 6 of my houses put together. That's the honest truth, Lily. The best thing that ever happened to me wasn't the money. It was getting invited to this table." Lily thought about this for a long moment. Then she said with the absolute finality of a child who has made up her mind, "Then you should come every Tuesday. Tuesday's tacos. And you're not sad anymore because you have us now." And Dylan watched Vivian Hale, the untouchable, the unbuyable, the woman who read markets and men, and never showed a card, put her hand over her mouth and blink hard and fast and lose for just a moment the war she was fighting with her own eyes. "I'd like that," Vivian managed. "I'd like that very much." After dinner, while Lily was in the bath conducting what sounded like a naval battle involving all of her bath toys, and several that were not bath toys, Dylan and Vivian stood in the kitchen doing dishes. Her washing him, drying an ordinary domestic rhythm that neither of them commented on, but both of them felt the enormity of. "The Navy complaint," Vivian said, quietly handing him a plate. "It's dead. Marsh withdrew it this morning. My attorney says he came in looking like he hadn't slept, mumbled something about a change of heart, and pulled the whole thing." She glanced at Dylan. "You want to tell me what really happened on your porch last night?" Dylan dried the plate. "I told you. It's handled." "Dylan." He set the plate down. "He came here, drunk, angry, blaming me for his life." Dylan kept his voice low, one ear on the naval battle down the hall. "And I told him the truth, that I didn't ruin his building was already ruined, that I wasn't going to fight him dirty because I didn't need to because I was clean and he wasn't, and that's the strongest position there is. And that the sad man standing on my porch at 9 at night wasn't something I did to him. It was just him meeting himself." He shrugged. "I didn't threaten him. I didn't have to. I just made him look at what he actually was for a second. Sometimes that's the worst thing you can do to a man like that. Hold up a mirror and make him look." Vivienne was quiet, her hands still in the soapy water. "You could have destroyed him. I handed you the whole arsenal. You could have ended him and been justified." "Yeah," Why didn't you? Dylan leaned against the counter. Because Lily was asleep 40 feet away. And someday, she's going to be in a fight where she's got the power to crush somebody who wronged her. And when that day comes, I want her to remember that her dad had that exact power once and chose to use the truth instead of the hammer. Because the hammer feels good for a minute, and then you're just a person who hits things. The truth. He paused. The truth builds something. Even when it's slower. Even when it's harder. Vivian pulled her hands from the water and turned to face him. Fully. Soap suds and all. And there was something in her face he'd never seen there before, something stripped all the way down. I've spent 20 years using the hammer, she said. 20 years. And I told myself it was strength. And in 2 months, a mechanic and an 8-year-old have shown me it was fear the whole time. I hit hard because I was afraid that if I didn't, I'd lose. And I've won and won and won, Dylan, and I ended up 52 floors up in the sky, completely alone. So afraid of being taken advantage of that, I never once let anyone close enough to... Her voice broke. I don't want to use the hammer anymore. I don't want to be that person. I've been so tired for so long, and I didn't even know it until I sat at your table and watched your daughter offer me a taco because she thought I was sad. Dylan set down the dish towel. Vivian, I'm sorry. She wiped at her eyes with the back of a soapy hand, laughing a little at herself. I'm crying in your kitchen over dishes. I don't do this. I don't ever do this. Maybe you should more often, Dylan said gently. It's how you know something's real. And they stood there in the small kitchen, close the water running. The sounds of a child's imaginary war drifting down the hall and the distance between them. The distance that had seemed so impossible. That first night, the man in the cheap jacket and the woman who owned the skyline. 2 people in the same room in completely different universes simply wasn't there anymore. It had been closing for 2 months, one honest piece at a time, and now it was gone. Dylan, Vivian said quietly. I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything back because I've been rehearsing it for a week, and if you interrupt me, I'll lose my nerve. Okay, she took a breath. I don't know how to do this. I want to be clear about that. I have no idea how to be with a person in a real way. I've never done it. I'm going to be bad at it. I'm going to accidentally treat things like transactions, and I'm going to be too controlling, and I'm going to have to learn from scratch at 34 years old how to let someone love me without waiting for the moment they show me what they really wanted all along. Her voice shook, but she kept going. But I want to learn. With you. And with her. I have never in my life wanted anything the way I want to keep sitting at that table on Tuesdays. And I know it's fast. And I know our lives don't make any sense together on paper. And I know I'm a mess. But I had to say it because you taught me that in this house we tell the truth, so here's mine. She looked at him terrified, and certain all at once. I'm falling in love with your family, both of you, and I don't want to spend one more night 52 floors up in the silence pretending I don't. Dylan Carter looked at this woman standing in his kitchen with soap on her hands and tears on her face, and her whole guarded heart laid bare on his cracked linoleum floor. And he thought about the last 6 years of bracing for loss, of never letting himself want anything he couldn't afford to lose, of lying awake, waiting for the floor to open. And he realized the floor wasn't opening. For the first time in 6 years, the floor was holding. Can I talk now? He asked softly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. I've been alone a long time, Dylan said. Since Sarah died, and I made myself a promise back then that I'd never let anyone in unless they were good for Lily. Not good for me, good for her, because she's the whole thing, she's the only thing that matters. He stepped closer. And I watched you tonight. I watched you get down on the floor to look my daughter in the eye. I watched you tell her the truth about being sad when it would have been easier to lie. I watched her take your hand and drag you off to see a city made of popsicle sticks. And I watched you look at it like it was the most important thing anyone had ever shown you. His voice went rough. You passed Vivian. You didn't even know you were being tested, and you passed the only test I've got. She's better with you here. I saw it. She talked more tonight than she has in months. She was lit up. He reached out and very gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his rough hand impossibly careful. And so was I. I've been so busy surviving for 6 years that I forgot what it felt like to have somebody in the house who was here for us. Not for what I could fix, not for what I could do. Just here. For us. Dylan. I'm falling in love with you too, he said simply. I have been since you handed me that card in a dead bar, and it didn't change one thing about how I stood in front of you. I just didn't let myself say it because I've spent 6 years bracing for the floor to open. He shook his head slowly. But it's not opening, is it? It's holding. You're holding. We're holding each other's weight, sharing the load. A slow smile. Turns out my daughter was right about the only thing that matters. And Vivian Hale made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob, and she stepped into him, and Dylan Carter wrapped his arms around the loneliest billionaire in the world, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, because some things don't need words. Some things you just hold on to and don't let the floor take. Dad! Dad! I need a towel. I made a tidal wave. They broke apart laughing, both of them wiping their eyes. Duty calls, Dylan said. Go, Vivian said. I'll finish the dishes. And then she caught his hand as he moved past and held it a second and said, Dylan, thank you for letting me in. I know what it cost you. Thank you for wanting in, he said. I know what that cost you too. They didn't rush it after that. That was the thing about the two of them. Both of them had spent too long learning caution to throw it away now. And both of them understood in their bones that the things worth building are built slowly, one honest piece at a time. Vivian came every Tuesday, then Tuesdays and Thursdays. Then she started staying for Lily's bath time naval battles and reading the bedtime chapter when Dylan had a late Navy call and Lily started calling her Viv. And then one night, months in half asleep, called her something else by accident, and then went bright red and pretended she hadn't, and Vivian had to leave the room so the child wouldn't see her cry. She kept her empire. Dylan would never have asked her to give it up, and she'd never have wanted to, but she ran it differently now. She'd stand in her boardroom 52 floors up, and when the lawyers whispered about crushing a smaller competitor, or burying a problem, or running the math, she'd hear a mechanic's voice in her head asking whether somebody's kid might get hurt. And more often, she chose the harder, cleaner, slower way. Her people noticed. Marcus Webb noticed and told her over dinner one night that she'd become the only client he actually respected. You used to be the smartest person in every room, he told her. Now, you're the best one. That's a bigger thing. Whatever changed, you hold on to it. His name's Dylan, Vivian said. And I'm holding on with both hands. Dylan kept his uniform. He kept his shifts and his side jobs, though he took fewer of them now, and only the ones he wanted: the widow's water heater, the neighbor's furnace in January, the honest small work of fixing what was broken. He wouldn't take Vivian's money, not for himself, and it drove her crazy, and she loved him for it. What he let her do eventually, after a long argument that Lily adjudicated from the top of the stairs, was set up a fund not for him, but for Lily. College. Engineering school when the time came. She's going to build things that don't fall down, Vivian said. The world needs that. Let me be part of it. And Dylan, who would give his own life for his daughter's future without a second thought, finally understood that letting someone help carry that weight wasn't weakness, it was the whole point. You share the load. No single one carries it all. The medical debt got paid off too eventually, but not the way Vivian had first wanted to do it, not with a wire transfer in the dark. It got paid off with Dylan's own consulting money, his own honest earnings from the buildings he walked, and the lives his eyes kept saving, one fair paycheck at a time. Until one Tuesday, he came to dinner and set the final receipt on the table and said quiet, "It's done. 6 years. It's done." And Vivian understood exactly what it meant to him, and she didn't say a word about how easily she could have erased it, because she'd learned that some mountains a man has to climb himself, and the climbing is the point. And the Riverside Tower stood. It opened a full year late, re-engineered from the 7th floor, down its transfer beams, carrying only what they were built to carry, its foundation drainage, running clean and true, away from the steel. Families moved in. Children slept on the 7th floor safe, never knowing that they were safe because of a Navy mechanic who'd stopped for a beer on a Thursday. Vivian offered once to put a small plaque somewhere in the lobby, not with his name. He'd never have allowed that, but something. Dylan said no. "The building standing up is the plaque," he said. "That's enough. That's plenty." It was almost a year to the day from the night at Callahan's when it happened. They were at the dinner table, Tuesday, tacos of course, and Lily, now 9, now missing a different tooth. Now the reigning household expert on beams and columns, and the tensile strength of dried glue, was in the middle of a story about a boy at school who didn't believe her. That the Golden Gate Bridge swayed on purpose when she stopped mid-sentence and looked back and forth between her father and Vivian with those frank, all-seeing eyes she'd had since she was small. "I have a question," Lily announced, "and I want a real answer, not a dad answer." Dylan set down his taco. "What's a dad answer?" "The kind where you don't actually say the thing." Lily fixed them both with a look. "Is Viv going to stay? Like stay? Or is she going to be like the others?" The table went very still. "What others, Bug?" Dylan asked carefully. "The people who come and then they go," Lily said, and her voice was smaller now, the bravado gone, and Dylan understood with a pang that his daughter had been carrying a quiet fear all these months, that he hadn't seen the fear of a child who lost her mother at 2 and has been braced ever since, just like her father, for the floor to open. "People come and they're nice and then they leave. Mom left. I know she didn't want to, but she left. And I just..." Lily looked down at her plate. "I don't want to like Viv all the way if she's going to leave. So I need to know. Real answer." Dylan opened his mouth and found he didn't have words and looked at Vivian. And Vivian Hale set down her fork and looked at this brave, frightened, brilliant little girl who had seen straight through to the one question that mattered, the same way she'd seen straight through Vivian's loneliness the very first night. And she did not give a dad answer. "I'm going to stay," Vivian said. Clear, certain. No hedge, no qualifier, no boardroom caution. "I'm not like the others, Lily. I promise you that. And I don't make promises I can't keep. Your dad taught me that a promise is only worth something if you'd rather die than break it. So I'm not saying it lightly." She reached across the table and took the girl's small hand in both of hers. "I'm going to stay, not because I have to. Because there is nowhere in the entire world I would rather be than at this table on a Tuesday with you and your dad and these tacos and your city of bridges that can't get squished. I spent my whole life looking for something and I didn't know what it was, and it turned out to be you two. I'm not leaving that, not ever. You're stuck with me." Lily studied her face for a long moment, running the inspection, checking the welds, looking for the flaw. And she didn't find one, because there wasn't one. Vivian was telling the truth, the whole truth, the way you had to in this house. And Lily's face broke open into a smile, and she said, quiet and certain, the words settling over the table like something being finished, something being made whole. "I think she stays, not like others." And Dylan Carter, who had spent 6 years bracing for loss, who had made his daughter's lunch the morning after the chaplain knocked, who had swallowed 1,000 insults and fixed 1,000 broken things and carried the whole weight alone for so long that he'd forgotten weight could be shared. Dylan Carter did not prepare for loss. For the first time in years, he didn't brace. He didn't wait for the floor to open. He didn't hold his breath against the coming grief. He just stayed in the moment, right there. At his own table, with his daughter's hand in a good woman's hands, with the smell of tacos and the drawings on the walls, and a bag of oranges on the counter, in the small, hard, beautiful home he'd built one honest piece at a time, and never once let anyone into until now. And so did she. Vivian stayed in the moment too, and she wasn't lonely, and she wasn't afraid, and she wasn't 52 floors up in the silence pretending she didn't want this. She was here. She was home. For the first time in her life, she was actually home. Outside, across the city, the Riverside Tower stood against the night sky. 40 stories of glass and steel. its beams carrying only what they were built to carry, full of sleeping families who would never know the mechanic who saved them. And in a small, warm house on the wrong end of a good street, three people who had each been alone in their own separate universe sat around a folding chair table and shared the load, and none of them carried the whole weight. And that was exactly why nothing broke. Two worlds had collided in silence in a dying bar on a Thursday night. A billionaire who watched people like markets, and a Navy dad who'd learned to disappear inside himself. Everyone in that room had thought they existed in different universes. They were wrong. Because the truest thing Dylan Carter ever taught anyone, truer than the load paths and the transfer beams, truer than why bridges don't fall down, was the thing his own daughter taught him first, with 3 popsicle sticks and a drop of glue, that a single beam standing alone will always eventually break under a weight it was never meant to carry. But 3 of them sharing the load, holding each other up, spreading the burden between them so no one point ever bears it all. 3 of them will stand forever. And they did.